Really excited to have my old friend and mentor and American legend, Peter Thiel, here with us today.
Thanks for having me on the show. Yeah,
Peter, I describe you as founder of PayPal and Palantir and Founders Fund. How else would you describe yourself?
Founder, investor. I don't know. I like figuring things out, where the world's going. I'm into winning and into ideas. I like both, winning and ideas.
I always think of you as kind of an applied philosopher, but you don't like the term philosopher.
It sounds really lame, actually.
Well, you're in Austin for a special lecture series at UATX. Let's start there just briefly. What's been your impression of our new university and the students?
It is surprisingly strong. Joe, I've told you before that if you don't pull off University of Austin, if you're not able to create a successful university at this time when they're all committing suicide, engaged in self-destruct, it's like an absolutely hopeless thing to do. So, but I think, I think the caliber of the people is really high, and I've done a decent amount of lecturing, speaking at different universities in the last few years, and it's just striking how it's very unclear what people are doing. It was a big achievement in a way for students to get into, elite colleges like Yale or Harvard or Stanford. But they're completely lost once they're there. High school still has an organizing function for it, where the point of high school is to get into college.
Yeah.
And then college, elite universities, I think the organizing function 50 plus years ago was you were supposed to get into the elite in our society. And that has completely broken down. There was an Alan Bloom speech at Harvard in the 1980s where he started with this obnoxious framing as my fellow elitists, because everyone at Harvard pretended to be egalitarian, but they were secretly elitist. And I think you couldn't give that speech at Harvard today, because there's nothing elite about it, nothing about forming an elite. You can't even pretend it behind closed doors or anything like that. And so for the next generation of people going into these places, they're just really lost.
It's unclear what to do. It's interesting. A lot of our elite institutions are broken down, where they're not as
but they're not elite institutions.
They're not anymore. A lot of the institutions that run our society are kind of broken, so they're not elite.
And of course, the institutions they feed into are probably also much less elite. So I don't know, 1950s and 60s, the CIA was elite, and people at Harvard and Yale would get in there. At this point, they probably done too many illegal drugs to get into CIA. You probably wouldn't want to get into CIA. It's not elite anymore.
Yeah.
But there are no real elite institutions it tracks into.
There were all these things around it that were the best things in our society that aren't anymore. So stepping back a second, then, this is the question. We have a lot of builders and investors in our audience, and we have these kids at these top colleges. Some of them are pretty smart. Assume you're talking to like a smart, ambitious person. How do you decide what to focus on, what to work on in our society? What should their goals be at this point?
I'm always so bad at the sort of how to help advice. But I would say that for the last 25, 30 years, tech, meaning broadly, computer science, software, internet, mobile internet, now crypto and AI, in the last few years, this has been sort of this one vector of progress in our society. This is where you can do new things. This is where you can build new companies. We can debate, whether it's big enough to take our civilization to a new level, or whether it's just big enough to build, companies that are worth billions or hundreds of billions or trillions of dollars. But it's been sort of the one place you can meaningfully do things, and then almost everything else is somehow stale, sclerotic. It's extremely Malthusian in practice. I studied philosophy as an undergraduate, and then went to law school, which I didn't realize, but when I majored in philosophy as a sophomore, you're actually deciding to go to law school. And then you sort of get narrowed. And in theory, law school gets advertised as this broad form of graduate education, but you just get narrowed into being a corporate lawyer. And it's probably of the, law, banking, medicine, consulting, those are like the four big tracks people had at Stanford probably in the late 80s when I was there, probably also in the early 2000s when you were there. Maybe 2/3 of the undergraduates were on one of those four tracks. Law is the one that's held up the best, I would say. And it's still pretty, it's pretty unhappy.
Yeah.
I would tell people to go into tech.
Yeah.
That's broadly what you're supposed to do. It doesn't necessarily mean you should start a company, but there's sort of a range of these companies you can work for, and it's surprising how much that's still not the narrative. Especially like if you're at a place like Harvard, my impression is they don't even know that Zuckerberg created Meta, Facebook at Harvard. It's like
They're disconnected from the reality.
They're disconnected from that. They have not even caught up to 2005.
So the time I was working for you, were working on the hedge fund, you were invested in Facebook, you're doing other investing, and we decided to really go all in and spend a lot of time on Palantir. Why was that the right choice then as tech? But would you go more specifically? Like what was your high level around that at that time? How were you thinking about it? What gap were we going after?
It was very broadly government, and then it was within that it was defense. More narrowly, it was sort of the intelligence community that's sort of defense adjacent. It was a couple of years after 9/11. We were sort of starting it in 2003, 2004. And there were all these ways that I felt that we didn't, that we had these very low tech and very privacy violating solutions for the terrorism problem. It was annoying that you had to take off your shoes at every airport, which was like just not security, but it was this incredibly intrusive security theater. And then the question was, could you do something where you'd have way more security with way fewer, technology's doing more with less. And so the terrorism context was, could we have more security against terrorists with less intrusive civil liberties violations? And then there was broadly this question, was there some way to reset all these things in the government? And it was a black box. And, we did not know whether places like the CIA and NSA and places like that had some super duper computer working in the background that was catching all the terrorists. We sort of suspected they didn't. And then it took a while to figure that out. But I think our suspicions were probably correct.
Yeah, we saw them doing a lot of things that made us suspect that they're actually gotten way behind Silicon Valley.
And there were details that it was hard to say. In some ways it turned out to be more difficult than one would have thought. There obviously are all these sectors we have that are very, very broken, where education, healthcare, all these sort of deeply broken sectors where the solution, there's some obvious solutions, and the fact they have not been implemented tells you there's some big barriers to implementation.
They're set up not to allow you to break them. This is kind of what I think of.
The Palantir version is, there was this, I forget what the acronym stands for. There was this software program. This was once we moved from intelligence community into the broader military, called DSIGs, which was sort of this, in theory, was a system where you're supposed to figure out ways to integrate the data across all these units in the field and headquarters, and integrate what was going on, which is an incredibly important thing to do. In practice, it was sort of a kludgy consultant billion-dollar boondoggle that didn't work, and we naturally thought we would replace it in 6 months, and it took something like 10 years. We finally replaced it in 2019, and we had to sue the Army, we had all our consultants quit and said, this is just the most ridiculous thing. You'll never you can't sue your customer, and you definitely can't sue the Army. And not only will you not get them as a customer, you will not get anybody else in DC. You'll just be blackballed by everybody. And then it was under, it was in 2016 that we sued them. It was under a 1994 law where, the military was supposed to have an open procurement process. And then what you can do when you sue somebody is you get discovery, and you sort of discover what's going on in the sausage making factory that no one's investigated for 22 years. And there's a lot of stuff. And there was sort of, there were internal reports that Palantir worked better, which didn't matter because obviously nobody can assess the software. But then more scandalously, there were orders to suppress the reports. There were emails that people had to hide the findings, and there was a cover up. And this did not sound like the open procurement process. And then you won at the court level, then you won at the district. At the DC circuit level, and they were forced to reopen the process, and then after a decade, we sort of got the contract. So so there was something that was doable, but it was not as straightforward as it sounded.
It feels like there's these, and SpaceX had to sue as well, of course. It feels like there's these parts of our society that are set up to just maintain their broken nature, and you have to just punch really, really, really hard through them. And it's very rare people do that.
Yeah, SpaceX was the first successful template to do it, and there's obviously something like this. The university system seems as broken or more than the military procurement process, and then especially with the accrediting agencies and all these things where they just are designed to prevent newcomers. But I think there was an Elon metaphor he told me once, and this was like I remember when, but it was like maybe 2010, 2011, and it was sort of like there were these 3 or 4 aerospace companies in the U.S. that were like really badly managed and badly run, and it was sort of, they were these very fat cows on this grassy enclosed field, and if you ever got in there was just going to be a bloodbath.
Oh yeah.
So it was kind of
It's like he's like
metaphor.
this carnivore, and there's a big fence, and you got to climb this really big fence.
Yes.
Eventually, you get in there.
Yes.
It's gonna be. So this is a very optimistic thing though, because both Elon and what we built together with Palantir, we're able to be great enough and persistent enough to overcome unnatural barriers and do something very optimistic and fix things. Should we also be trying to do that in healthcare and education and universities in some sense? Is it because it was almost impossible, but it turned out after like years of work that we did it? Shouldn't we also do that now in other areas?
It is worth trying in a lot of areas. Look, I always think it's better to be optimistic than pessimistic. It is. It's probably not the place where I quibble with the name of your show is that I don't think it's good to be insanely optimistic or insanely pessimistic. At the extreme, optimism and pessimism are the same thing, because if you are extremely pessimistic, there's nothing you can do. If you're extremely optimistic, there's nothing you need to do. You just need to, the singularity is near. It's the Kurzweil book title. It's a very optimistic title. And all you need to do is sit back and eat some popcorn and watch the movie of the future unfold. So both extreme optimism and extreme pessimism converge on laziness and on people not doing anything. So I think moderate optimism is the correct thing. And then I think you have to always pick your battles. The part that's I think more difficult about education and healthcare, or historically was more difficult, was that these were areas that lots of people were trying to reform, and there were lots of different attempts people had. Whereas, let's say in 2004, 2005, when we started Palantir, the idea of trying to do a military-related software startup, there was nobody who even wanted to give you money as a venture capitalist.
People thought we were insane. Yeah.
And so there was sort of an element where if you could get through, you would have no competition. And then, a decade later, we still had no competition. There's probably a lot more going on in the defense space now than there was in the mid 2000s. But and again, having zero competition, it's good if it works. Maybe it just tells you you're insane. So even that's an ambiguous thing. But then the place where probably the two areas where I've had we've tried to invest. I've been at this venture capital thing. We started Founders Fund in 2005. So in different ways, I've been at this, and I've done some angel investing before that, but I've been doing this for 20 plus years. And the area where we've probably had the least success from a returns basis in software, the two worst areas are educational software related companies and healthcare IT companies. And like education, we felt was so hard. We did very little. Healthcare, we tried a few more things. But it's the rough version of what's gone wrong in the healthcare sector. So we've done so little in education, I feel like I can't even comment on it. But healthcare, what's roughly gone wrong is you have all sorts of things that sound like a pretty good plan for reforming the system. And it's this one angle on the pricing model that you need to change. But then there are 10 different ways you can do it. And it's these complicated ways you have to get the payments to shift from the insurance companies or the government or the hospitals, which are very kludgy. If you can just get consumers or doctors to change, that might be easier, but they typically are not the people who pay. And so there's this very kludgy, messed up system. Lots of people try to do it. My sociological model is always that I'm deeply skeptical of investments where a lot of VCs would go to some silly VC networking event and want to brag about it. And I feel there's a lot of that with the healthcare education startups.
This is like the green tech stuff too. It's too popular. Basically.
The green tech stuff. Yeah, I mean, at some point it loses money and then it's not popular anymore. But while it lasts, it's very popular because there's no fast term accountability in venture capital. Sometimes you have momentum and the valuations go up, and that does give you a feel whether things are working. But in practice, it's 5-10 years later, you get liquidity on these businesses, or even longer. It takes incredibly long. And so people tend to over-index on these sociological factors and what's popular. And so there's a way that the healthcare education sectors, even though they're very broken, people have these often too conventional ideas on how to fix them. And so it's another trend where I've tried investing some over the last decade is are all these marijuana related businesses, and it's like it's obviously like a big trend, but it's an obvious trend, and then it turned out to be extremely hard to figure out what to do with.
It's some of the things that are too popular and too obvious. It's just you have to have a totally different take on them or it's not going to work.
Yeah, so. You like if you have an unpopular take on it, that might work.
That's interesting. I want to pivot to macro for a little bit. We're a few months into the new administration. Donald Trump hired a lot of people we know are working in different parts of the administration. I'm gonna maybe obviously obligatory question on trade, but first, like, what are you most excited about that's going on in the administration right now? Are there things that you think are really cool or things they're doing well?
I'm the most hopeful I've been about things in a long time. I think there are some very deep problems that need to be fixed. I think the opposition is completely exhausted and out of ideas, and so it's maybe the first time since early Reagan that there's really an opportunity to change some things in this country, and it's not the sort of lame Bush Republican thing we had in the for a long time in between, and I don't think it's the completely sabotaged first Trump administration where you had it got blocked on every level outside and inside the administration. Yeah. So I think they will get and it's very unusual. Normally the second term does less than the first term. This is going to be will be the real first term.
Yeah, I have a lot of really bold friends in HHS and DOD and Department of Education and all these places.
And then there also are extremely big things that are very broken. You have a 6% current account, 6% budget deficit of 6% of GDP, but 5 or 6% budget GDP budget deficit, and that's basically there's probably no fun way to fix that. You raise taxes, you cut spending. There probably are some efficiency gains you can make, but
what do you think of Doge? Speaking of efficiency gains, it's like, can they get $500 billion with Doge? Like, what can they do? What do you think? Can they do more?
I think there's a lot you can get. There's going to be a lot of resistance to getting it. You have to, the correct answer is just you need, is always my correct answer. My answer on tax policy, what should tax rates be? Just always a little bit lower. I'm not going to tell you the number. They should always be a little bit lower. And, how much it should always be, the government should be more efficient. And then once you've made it more efficient, you should make it more efficient. And there's a lot of room for that.
And there's a lot of shocking stuff they're finding. Even
I wouldn't want to limit it to half I don't know. It's a $4 trillion annual spend budget.
I think it's higher now. Yeah.
And then of course, a lot of that's entitlements, but
I think 6.5 now, actually, because I think 4 is what we're taking in, 4 point something we're taking in. We're spending 6.5 because 3.8 is entitlements. That's a lot.
But even the non-entitlement piece is incredibly off.
No, and entitlements have lots of fraud too, probably. But I've been a little bit shocked. Like, I knew there was waste, but there seems like a lot of scams they're finding. I guess like a lot more scams, than I
think there were scams. I think the nonprofit stuff is
the NGO stuff's out of control.
It's really out of control. It's sort of like I don't know. It's sort of like virtue signaling is a sign that you're doing something evil. Yeah. And so much of this left-wing philanthropy nonprofit world, I think, was it was just a cover for borderline criminal activity.
It's how you shield yourself. You put a virtue signal up while you're stealing money from everyone. Yeah.
There's there's all this stuff you have to really go into the weeds of how this stuff works. But the way it was explained to me, there's sort of a level 5 description, which is a line item description of what the actual dollars are going to, and then there are ways these things get summarized. And the way they got summarized for a lot of the political appointees was a level 4 description, where you summarize a bunch of level 5 descriptions as an alternate, in a level 4 way. And then obviously there are ways, you can have, 20 groups that are, providing food to different African countries, and you can summarize that as food to Africa. That's maybe an accurate description. And then if they're actually all working on the Biden re-election, that's an inaccurate description. At some point, the descriptions are so inaccurate that the people in the government could be prosecuted for fraud.
I think a lot of people need to be punished not to do it again. Otherwise, it's going to get turned back on. I want to ask you, we've been talking about China on and off for over 20 years and their imbalances. I think this week, the president declared a trade war on them effectively with 125% tariffs as of now. It'll probably change in the next few days because these things keep changing. So, but it's like what do you think of the trade and tariff policy? What's going to happen? Bond yields sold off more than I expected. The yields went higher than I expected so far. Like what's going on?
Well, I'm hesitant to comment since obviously it's a very, very fluid situation, but something like the sort of reset they're talking about now seems where we're going, where you need a very drastic reset with China. In theory, you need a reset with other people, but what we really need to get them to do is also reset things with China. I think the rough numbers are that about a quarter of the U.S. trade deficit is bilaterally with China, but another quarter is indirectly with China. So China is sort of half the problem, and so it's selling components that then get reassembled elsewhere. and then China is the geopolitical rival. So there's a way in which if people in Mercedes in Germany are selling cars to the U.S., we might want to have those pretty well-paying jobs in the U.S. and not in Germany. And there are all kinds of sort of mercantilist policies that at the margins Germany engages in. But it's probably not going to repurpose the Mercedes factory to build tanks to invade the U.S. or something like this. Yeah. Whereas this this sort of dual use problem is the problem with China. And so there are ways the economic relationship with China is fairly efficient. If people working for $1.50 an hour in a Foxconn factory, we don't really want to get those jobs in Wisconsin. But it is this geopolitical rivalry where that's in the background, where that you have to somehow factor in this, that the economists never are able to factor in properly with China. And so I think, I don't know, I'm not sure I would call this the optimistic plan, but the reset in trade that seems desirable to me would be that we radically change the relationship with China, and we sort of induce a lot of other countries to radically change their relationship with China, and that's how we and maybe that's how we build a stronger Western alliance of the free world.
Yeah. There's going to be some interesting negotiations in the next few months. Do you think that we could bring, maybe using AI, some more advanced manufacturing here that wasn't in China? Is that a real thing the next decade, to do a bunch more of it here thanks to our more efficiencies and productivity?
There's probably always a decent amount of things like that. You have to always be extremely granular on how expensive the robots are, how expensive the equipment is, because in some sense manufacturing has been getting steadily more automated for 250 years, and you've had the machines that make the machines that make the machines are getting sort of smarter and more complicated. And there are ways in which AI is a quantum leap. There's a way in which it's just a natural continuation of this two century long process. I think there are some parts that can be moved to the U.S. With AI. Maybe also if you change some of the environmental rules and some of the other anti-industrial policies we have in the U.S. But then if parts of this are moved to other emerging market countries, Vietnam is it's a communist country. It has bad mercantilist policies, but it's not planning to take over the world. And so at the margins, if we can move things from China to Vietnam, that's a big win.
I want to ask you about a theory I have. It's based on how you see things. So one of the things you've been talking a lot about lately is how our culture, I want to put words in your mouth, but things are broken to such an extent that we're not advancing as quickly as we were in the Industrial Revolution, right? Something's wrong with our culture, something's wrong with science. It's not advancing.
Yeah, I would say, it's generally been stagnant in the world of atoms, not the world of bits, for something like 50 years. And then why it's happened is overdetermined, but there are cultural factors. Maybe we just ran out of ideas, which is a very pessimistic version. Maybe there's something wrong in our culture. Maybe we're too risk averse. Maybe we're scared about how apocalyptic some of the science and tech are. But for a range of different reasons, it's slowed down since the 1970s.
Mm-hmm. And I tend to think of things, and I'm not sure this is how you see it, but I take some of maybe your interest in Girard and mimetic theory, and I say people tend to all think of things the same way, even when it's incorrect, because it's natural to be mimetic and to think of things the wrong way together. That's kind of why cultures move in the wrong way. And so I tend to see that there's a lot of opportunities right now, thanks to the fact that you do have this kind of broken cultural situation where people are thinking of it wrong. So for example, I'm particularly bullish, I know it's random, but on Elon's Boring Company, I'm excited. I was working on it with some of the guys yesterday on tunnels, because I think it's just obvious we could create trillions of dollars of value by building tunnels and getting rid of traffic around our cities. And the reason that opportunity exists is because of this thing that's really broken, because it's an obvious thing, but just it's so broken that no one's doing it. Are there things like that where there's opportunities tied to the fact that things are broken? And do you see it that way?
Well, those anything that fits that pattern is a great opportunity. Yeah. So if you have some, it's always, if it's broken, not because of the science or tech. So it doesn't require a miraculous, you don't have to have a dozen miracles in terms of tech breakthroughs. Yeah. You have to just do something in this non-mafia controlled drilling way or whatever, where, I think so many of the tunneling is this super corrupt contracting. It's mafia adjacent, sort of super corrupt labor union adjacent. And so, I don't know, it costs, what it costs to build a subway in Manhattan. It's like $1 billion a mile.
Billions, yeah.
So
billion miles.
10 times, I think it's 10 times as much as Paris or something like that, which we don't think of exactly capitalist efficiency.
It's the same.
So,
and Elon's a tenth the cost of Paris, right? So it's like a 100x multiple. It's crazy.
But then the place where I always think it's non-trivial is that there's some non-tech reason we're not even at the Paris level.
Yep. And so, but if you could push through, then you could do something big.
You could do something big even if you could get to the Paris level. And so you have to think really hard about what that political blocker is and how to overcome that.
And so there's all these things that are dysfunctional and broken and not working. And if things like right now, I think you're more optimistic than you have been. You said like should we be trying to use our voice and fix things more? I know a lot of friends who've just decided to exit, right? And a lot of friends are in Singapore or in Switzerland. They gave up. They think it's going to be too hard to fix it. I feel like you're in between this, where you've done a lot of things to fight for our society and to fix a lot of things, but then you're like skeptical. You should be pushing too hard in a bunch of areas. How do you think about that trade-off with voice and exit on these things?
I think it's very important to try. It's very important to pick the right battles. Is what I would always say. And so I don't know. Yeah, the in between answer is I don't think you can just be shooting at bad guys when they're 2 miles away and firing your guns at random. And we're
it's not about trying. It's about actually winning.
It's not. We're not measuring input. We're measuring where you can actually get output. I keep trying in a lot of these areas. We've made a number of investments over the years in nuclear technology, and it always when you look at the science, there are all these much better ways that in theory you could do it. You can build small modular fission reactors. Maybe the fusion technology is not that far away. There are different verticals within the industry where things are extremely broken, and in theory you should find a way to build a successful company that overcomes some of these problems. And then there's a sobering reality that the Nuclear Regulatory Commission basically hasn't approved a new reactor design in 50 plus years. And so it's always these things that you're trading off. There's some point where it's the right battle to pick, but
you can't do all of them, obviously.
You can't. I don't know. This is probably not the best analogy, but it's if you go surfing, you want to paddle just in front of a wave, and but the wave has to be there. Yeah. And if you're paddling like crazy on a still day where there are no waves, it doesn't work.
Yeah. So we live in these complex systems, and like a lot of people, they basically are maybe too pessimistic or too optimistic, like you said. They just think system's going to happen no matter what. I guess for the great man theory of history, you say it's not just that a great man comes and does something. You have to understand the system. You have to understand what's possible, but you do believe people can then make a big difference if you understand it well enough.
Yeah, you have to. There's probably some sense of timing. There's some point where these things can break through.
And let's speaking of timing, there's a big vibe shift going on in Silicon Valley right now. I think it's very different than it was 2 years ago in a positive direction. Some people say there's even a spiritual revival component to it. Like, do you think it's real? And what's changed in the vibe in Silicon Valley? What's possible now based on that?
I think it has. I think it's shifted a lot. And then of course you have to sort of think about why was it so monolithically center left before, and you can analyze it on the level. I was on the Meta board for 17 years from 2005 to 2022, and there's sort of one version where it was people like Zuckerberg or Sheryl Sandberg were just these sort of communist billionaires. And then there was sort of a bottom-up theory where it was kind of this woke millennial workforce that it was sort of this mob that was ruling the company or something like this. But then there's also sort of a top-down theory that it was basically incredible pressure from this left-wing regulatory state that pushed these companies. And I think that was a big dimension of it. There was sort of a lot of surface area where these things could be regulated, and as long as you sort of tilted them to the left, you ended up you thought you were appeasing the beast.
You protected yourself.
There's some way in which the founders, again, cite someone like Zuckerberg, I don't think were deeply political. He didn't want to, he wanted to spend his time building products, thinking about that. He didn't want to spend his time, at congressional hearings in DC.
So it was just easiest to do something.
It was easiest to do something. It often seemed like it was sort of a moderate amount you had to do. We had to do, okay, we do some DEI. It's, we'll get credit for this, and then it won't hurt us that much. And then basically at some point, and then, if you do something and it doesn't work. So let's say we're doing DEI, but we are our workforce is not getting better. it's always ambiguous, and you can say that you haven't done enough of the thing, or you can say we have to stop it altogether. And so the way I would tell the arc was for many years, the answer was just, we have to do more, and we have to do more. And then at some point it completely collapsed. And that collapse happened in some way over the last 4 or 5 years.
But it wasn't really safe to admit it until like the last several months, right? In some ways.
I think it felt very unsafe to admit it in the first Trump administration, because in some ways all these things went into overdrive, and they were sort of polarized around these sort of tribal politics, or the tribal politics were used to push these things into overdrive. I think by the time Biden came in, it was safe for people behind closed doors to say this stuff is really not working, or and then certainly by the time Trump came back, it was even if people did not support President Trump in 2024, didn't support him publicly, there was an incredible felt sense among all the top CEOs I know in Silicon Valley that there's all the stuff you can't talk about. There are things they tell me behind closed doors that are very different from what they feel they can say in public. And the gap felt really, really big for a number of years. I know there was one of the bigger tech companies. Again, it's overdetermined. There's a bottom up, top down, mid-level management layer. There are all sorts of layers of the stuff that got messed up. But their version was, you had the most woke workforce in San Francisco, and so it was just they were going to move a certain percentage of their people out of San Francisco every year, and that was the plan. And then it was not what they could talk about. So there was sort of a conversation they'd have with me, and not inside the company. And so I think the delta between what people said behind closed doors and what they thought they could say in public was extremely big. I guess this is always a problem with these speech codes, these restrictions on free speech, is that they eventually backfire very badly on the left, which is pushing them, because at some point it sets up this thing where people don't flip at the margins. At some point it sets up this thing where they flip radically. At some point, it only takes one little child to say the emperor has no clothes, and you get a cascade.
That's right. So it's scary about woke AI as well, I guess, the same way. You don't want to make too many rules to try to protect it from saying things, because all of a sudden it could go the other way. It's interesting.
Probably this is, by the way, also the hopeful thing on Doge, where the pessimistic view is, man, the government always grows and no departments ever get shut down and nothing ever changes. I think Milton Friedman's line on it was, there's not a single government program that's ever gotten defunded once it gets started. So it's always just a one-way racket. But then, in 2019, maybe people like the two of us had our suspicions that the people in government weren't working very hard. But after 5 years of remote work, and what we know from our companies is that remote work is not working, and 5 years of people, 90% or whatever of the federal workforce not working and not making a difference, you sort of realize that these people weren't working before, and it doesn't matter, and maybe you can replace them with AI, or maybe you can replace them without AI, and just use the AI can be completely fake, and we can improve things tremendously.
Well, that's a very optimistic note from you, Peter, to end it on. So thank you very much for being here today.
Thanks for having me.